Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time to a day in the life of a medieval king. The year is somewhere between 1250 and 1350. You're not in shining armor yet. You're under a mountain of woolen sheets, swaddled in furs that smell faintly of cedar and less faintly of unwashed humanity. Your eyes crack open to the glow of tallow candles and the sound of shuffling feet. Servants, already moving like silent ghosts across the freezing flagstone floor. A jug of warm wine steams near the hearth. A priest is murmuring something from the Psalms under his breath. You groan. Welcome to the royal morning. And hey, you probably won't survive this. Between the infections, the assassinations, the indigestion, and the sheer weight of ceremonial nonsense, medieval monarchy is just a very glamorous form of slow-motion burnout. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir beneath the embroidered canopy, blinking as winter light pushes through the stained glass slits of your chamber. The curtains are woven with gold thread and scenes from the Old Testament. David slaying Goliath, Moses parting the Red Sea, and some awkward cherub with oddly long toes. Your bed is elevated on a dais, part prestige, part paranoia. Higher means harder to reach. Yet even this lofty platform doesn't save your spine from the reality of medieval luxury. Lumpy straw bolsters, feather mattresses that have slouched into awkward shapes, and a perpetual draft curling around your feet. You're not alone. At least a dozen people hover nearby. A valet with perfectly parted hair waits with your chamber pot, because royalty never pees alone. A page holds a fur-lined cloak. An herbalist hovers in case your old war wound flares up again. It will. There's even a designated waker, a young boy who pokes your foot gently until you grunt awake. His name is possibly Henry. You can never remember. You sigh. The moment you blink twice, a servant lifts the bed curtain. Good morrow, sire. The room smells of wax, wood smoke, and bodies. Everyone looks a little too chipper. You pull the furs tighter around yourself like a shield. But there's no escaping the ritual. First comes the water. Not hot, of course. Warm if you're lucky. You thrust your hands into a silver basin, while two servants hold your sleeves back. A third pats your face with a cloth dipped in rosemary and vinegar. This is considered refreshing. In truth, it stings like regret. Then comes the holy moment. The priest shuffles forward and begins a softly chanted prayer in Latin. You kneel, half awake, on a cushion. It's all very pious until your knee pops and you bite back a curse. Everyone pretends not to notice. Religion is more than routine here. You're God's appointed ruler, or so the doctrine insists. That means every morning starts with an acknowledgement that your authority flows straight from heaven. despite your very human hangover. Speaking of which, breakfast is still a distant dream. First, you have to approve the day's clothing. This is no small task. In fact, dressing you is an ordeal that rivals small construction projects. Today's outfit has already been laid out with military precision: hose, tunic, surcoat, undertunic, overtunic, and, just for flair, a blue velvet mantle embroidered with lions. The blue dye alone cost more than a peasant makes in 2 years. You stand like a statue while layers are draped, buckled, belted, and pinned onto you. You shift your weight from one foot to the other as they lace your boots. One servant fluffs your mantle, another brushes stray hairs from your collar. You are now encased in roughly 20 pounds of symbolism. You take a moment to look at yourself in the polished metal mirror. You look regal. You also look tired. Behind you, the squire is fussing over your ceremonial sword, which you won't wear until later. Too early for accessories. Outside the tall windows, the gray sky drips rain over the keep's mossy roof. Below, in the castle courtyard, you can just make out the clatter of hoofbeats and the barking of dogs. Your kingdom is awake. There's a knock at the chamber door. A steward enters with a scroll and a worried expression. "Sire, the bishop has requested a private audience. He says it's urgent." Of course he does. Another servant announces that your hunting dogs are sick. Another that the cook accidentally used the wrong salt in the pantry and may have cursed tomorrow's stew. Yet another mentions the queen is waiting in her solar, and she's been knitting something concerning. It's not even 7 a.m., but here's the thing. Despite all this bustle, your kingdom runs on your presence. Everyone is waiting for you to start the day. And today, just like every other day, you'll have to make it seem like you're in control. A mainstream historical fact. Most medieval kings, especially in the 13th and 14th centuries, were woken by a team of attendants and expected to begin participating in state functions almost immediately after rising. A quirky tidbit. Henry VIII reportedly hated being woken by anyone except his closest groom of the stool. Yes, the guy who also helped him use the bathroom. That's intimacy you can't unsee. Historians still argue whether medieval kings actually maintained consistent routines or simply adapted their days based on crises, visits, weather, and royal whims. You glance once more at your reflection, adjust the clasp of your cloak, and take a deep breath. Your footsteps echo as you stride toward the door. The king has risen. Let the chaos commence. You trudge out of your chamber with royal posture, which mostly means pretending your knees aren't sore and your bladder isn't full. 2 guards trail behind you, their armor clinking like distant wind chimes. Somewhere in the hallway, a hound barks and someone drops a pewter plate. You don't flinch. You're the king. You flinched last week, and they're still talking about it. The corridor is lined with grim old ancestors staring down from dark oil portraits. Most of them look like they died mid-scowl. Their expressions say, "Rule well," but their eyebrows say, "Good luck, buddy." First stop, the chapel. Your private chapel is small, but ridiculously ornate. Gilded arches, painted saints. A bone fragment from some martyred bishop sits in a velvet case that smells faintly of mildew. Your chaplain meets you at the door with a bow so deep he nearly headbutts the floor. He begins Mass without delay, Latin words curling through the incense. You kneel, you rise, you nod in time with Scripture. You try not to yawn. Halfway through the sermon, your mind wanders. Was it today you were meeting the envoy from Castile? Or tomorrow? And did you sign off on that new grain tax? Or just grimace? Meaningfully? You can't remember. The service ends with a solemn blessing and the ceremonial sprinkling of holy water. It drips down your collar. You mutter a thank you that sounds more like a threat. Time for politics. Your council chamber is already humming. Candles flicker. Scrolls and ink pots crowd the long oak table. Half the men here are seasoned nobles who supported your father and resent your nose. The other half are upstart barons who want you to forget their treason 2 winters ago. You take your seat at the head and try to look like someone who understands economic policy. A steward clears his throat and begins. First order of the day, the sheep tax. Of course it is. Apparently, wool traders in the north are grumbling about the latest levy. Your treasurer suggests increasing enforcement. Your cousin suggests hanging someone publicly. Your bishop suggests prayer. Your jester, leaning in from the corner, suggests taxing sheep for their bleating. He gets a few tired chuckles. You listen. You nod. You pretend your headache isn't growing. This is the real grind of kingship, not battles or coronations, but endless talk of barns, boundaries, and border disputes. A merchant guild in the next town over wants a new charter. A monastery claims their fish pond was accidentally seized by local knights. Someone wants to build a bridge. Someone else wants to burn it. You scrawl your signature more than a monk with a drinking problem. One particularly oily noble insists you visit his estate to bless a new grain mill. He even brought a tiny, decorative sack of flour as a bribe. You accept it with a smile so thin it could slice parchment. Throughout all this, your breakfast waits cold. Eventually, someone places a tray near your elbow, just within reach, as if by accident. It holds a slice of brown bread, a lump of half-melted cheese, and a goblet of watered wine. You tear off a piece of bread and chew it slowly while pretending to weigh the fate of a disputed orchard. Mainstream historical fact. Kings were typically involved in a surprising amount of daily administrative work, including arbitration of petty disputes and direct oversight of taxes, land grants, and ecclesiastical appointments. Delegation was common, but presence was power. Quirky tidbit: Edward I once issued an official proclamation against false measures of ale, essentially demanding taverns be more honest with their pint sizes. A man after your own heart. Historians still argue whether early morning council meetings were productive or largely ceremonial, meant more to show that the king was engaged than to enact real policy. Judging by the glazed looks around the room, the answer might be both. Halfway through an argument about river tolls, your queen arrives. She enters in silent grace, her attendants flanking her like living wallpaper. Her presence causes a subtle but immediate shift. Men straighten their backs, voices lower. A few, suspiciously, reach for their swords. Your queen smiles politely and says nothing, but everyone watches her like she's about to flip a table. You rise and kiss her hand. Her fingers are cold. You wonder if she heard about last night's dice game, or if she let you think she didn't. Back to the sheep. The arguments go in circles. You begin to doodle a crown in the margin of a decree. The jester, standing behind your chair, leans in and whispers, "This is the part of kingship no ballad ever sings of." You snort softly. Suddenly there's a ruckus outside, raised voices and the sound of hurried boots. A messenger bursts in, red-faced, hair clinging to his forehead. He bows so fast he nearly eats the carpet. "Sire, an envoy from Flanders has arrived. Demands audience." "Demands? Oh, good." You rise slowly, cloak sweeping behind you like a reluctant tide. With a nod, you adjourn the council for now, much to the relief of everyone still pretending to care about sheep. The envoy is waiting in the great hall. He's tall, pale, dressed in something halfway between armor and upholstery. He bows deeply and begins a speech you've heard 50 times in 50 variations. Trade routes, fishing rights, insulted dukes, blah, blah, blah. You smile. You listen. You pretend not to notice he's wearing shoes made of shark skin, which is either a flex or a cry for help. As he drones on, you glance at the stained glass window beside you. The sun has broken through. Light spills across the stone floor. For a moment, everything's peaceful. Then he mentions tariffs again, and the moment is over. You nod sagely. You promise to consider his requests. You assure him the crown values friendship with Flanders, and as soon as he leaves, you mutter under your breath, "That man smells like dried fish." You're tired. You've been awake for 3 hours, and you haven't even gotten to the fun part yet. Ceremonial meat. But that comes later. Right now, you've got to go change into your luncheon robe, because yes, there's a different outfit for that. You step back into your private chambers and immediately regret it. The changing attendants are already waiting, 3 of them this time standing beside a wardrobe the size of a small barn. Inside, row upon row of robes shimmer under candlelight, ermine-trimmed velvets, jewel-toned silks, one particularly aggressive-looking tunic embroidered with gold falcons. You point wordlessly to the deep crimson robe with fur edging. It's formal enough to say, "I am your ruler," but cozy enough to suggest, "I didn't want to get out of bed either." You lift your arms like a puppet and let them do the work. Layer off, layer on. Buttons, ties, fasteners, that odd belt no one can figure out, but everyone insists is traditional. Once you're properly redraped, the servants smooth your sleeves like you're about to be roasted and served. Now, finally, it's time for breakfast. You walk through the stone passageways toward the great hall. The floors are damp with last night's condensation, and your boots click with the rhythm of weary power. You pass a group of scullery boys carrying baskets of turnips and shouting cheerful obscenities at one another. One of them sees you, turns pale, and drops his entire basket. You nod magnanimously and keep walking. A king does not pause for vegetables. The hall is warm with smoke and chatter. A hearth burns brightly at the far end, and rows of high-backed chairs line the long table beneath a faded tapestry of your grandfather's favorite war. He's in the middle, crushing someone under his horse. Your chair is at the head, obviously, raised on a shallow dais that gives you the perfect view of the nobles, clerics, knights, and cousins currently pretending to like one another. You sit. A servant bows and pours wine into your goblet with great ceremony. You raise it. Everyone else follows suit as required. You sip. Everyone else sips. Only then can breakfast begin. And what a breakfast! This is not a dainty bowl of oats and berries. This is a greasy, carnivorous affair designed to remind everyone at the table that you have power, wealth, and enough preserved meat to survive several sieges. The platters begin arriving: heavily salted pork, cold roast venison from yesterday's hunt, thick slabs of dark rye, a pie of eel and leeks, possibly a gift from the bishop, and 2 boiled eggs that somehow both look overcooked and undercooked at once. You reach for a slice of game pie. It's tepid and crumbles weirdly. You eat it anyway. A monarch who doesn't eat his pie risks rumors. A small bowl of pickled onions sits near your plate. You take one. It tastes like tangy revenge. The conversation starts slowly. Sir Godwin, your most pompous noble, begins a story about his latest tourney victory. You've heard it before. It gets longer every time. He now claims to have dismounted a knight with a look. You nod politely, wondering if anyone would notice if you fed him to the hawks. Further down the table, your cousin Matilda is whispering to her ladies-in-waiting, casting glances your way. She's probably commenting on your robe choice, or your hair, or plotting to steal your throne. With cousins, it's usually all three. The jester arrives, not from a door, but from under the table, which is frankly unsettling. He pops up beside you holding a cooked fish with a crown made of onion rings. "Sire, your likeness," you chuckle. The nobles laugh too, because it's either that or exile. A historian might say that medieval meals were opportunities for political reinforcement. The king ate first, dictated tone and topic, and used subtle gestures to elevate or humiliate guests. And you certainly try to follow that pattern. But this morning, you're just trying to avoid the custard. Ah, yes, the custard. It's thick, yellowish, and brought to you with far too much pride by your steward. You poke it with a spoon. It jiggles ominously. You make a mental note to promote whichever servant can sneak this bowl into Sir Godwin's satchel. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval kings often ate separately or at elevated tables during communal meals, using food as a tool of power and hierarchy. Menus varied wildly, but generally featured meat-heavy dishes, even at breakfast. Quirky tidbit. Richard II's court once hosted a feast with over 300 dishes, including peacocks redressed in their own feathers and roasted hedgehogs filled with spices. You are suddenly grateful for just the eel pie. Historians still argue whether these meals were truly opulent daily affairs or more modest in reality, with extravagance reserved for feasts and holy days. Records suggest a mixture, heavy on display, but not always on flavor. As breakfast drags on, the conversation shifts to war rumors in the north. A baron casually mentions border skirmishes, and someone else mutters something about those cursed Welsh again. You nod slowly and stab a sausage like it's a map. You hear your name murmured by two knights near the end of the table. You glance their way. They fall silent. One of them immediately requests more turnips. Guilty. You lean back in your chair and scan the hall. Your queen has not joined you. She's at prayer, which could mean anything from actual devotion to passive-aggressive embroidery. You finish with a goblet of spiced wine and wave your hand, gracefully, of course, to signal the end of the meal. Everyone stands as you do. Your steward announces the time for wardrobe readjustment, which is possibly the most medieval phrase anyone's ever spoken. You leave the table with dignity, even if your stomach is regretting the eel. A breeze follows you through the corridor, carrying the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. Outside, the falconers are already gathering. You smile faintly. Finally, something fun. But first, more clothes. Back in your chambers. For the third time today, you're met by yet another clothing committee. At this point, you wonder if your true calling is not kingship, but simply being a very dignified mannequin. Two valets and a master of wardrobe are already debating which tunic projects the right balance of casual power, and don't scare the visiting nobleman. You vaguely suggest something brown, which is ignored immediately. Eventually, they settle on a fitted doublet in forest green with gold thread trim, plus a matching hood with a tiny embroidered falcon, because, yes, everything must be thematically appropriate, even your hat. Your outer cloak is secured with a brooch shaped like a sword in flames. You look like a man going to war with birds. Now properly dressed for falconry, you descend to the castle courtyard, where a small entourage is waiting. You're handed a thick leather glove. A falcon, tethered and hooded, perches on the wrist of your master falconer. He bows deeply, then transfers the bird to you like a sacred relic. The falcon is heavier than you remember. Possibly it resents you. Your hunting party includes several nobles, a couple of cousins, 3 horses you won't be riding today, and an enthusiastic boy whose only job seems to be shouting, "Make way for the king," at confusing intervals. Out through the castle gate you go. The countryside opens around you, rolling hills, misty woodlands, and the occasional muddy patch that attempts to eat your boots. The air smells of wet grass, horse sweat, and something faintly floral. A breeze ruffles your cloak. You feel, for the first time today, almost free. The falcon stirs on your glove. You remove its hood. Its eyes blink rapidly, adjusting to the light, and then lock onto a distant pigeon with an intensity you've only ever seen in people arguing over inheritances. With a nod, you raise your arm and let go. The falcon bursts into flight with a whoosh that ripples your sleeve. It arcs into the sky, a blur of feathers and violence, and the entire party goes quiet watching its path. Moments later, it swoops down, too quickly to follow, and vanishes into the underbrush. There's a pause. Then, whoomp, and your falconer smiles. "Direct hit, sire." You nod, trying not to look too smug. The nobles begin to clap politely. Your cousin whispers, "Marvelous form," as if your wrist just wrote poetry. The queen's second cousin calls you anointed by the heavens of the air. You briefly wonder if he's drunk. You walk further, pausing occasionally for commentary, wildlife spotting, or exaggerated praises of your stride. You hear one noble claim your footfalls are like the soft thuds of justice. You begin to suspect falconry is less about hunting and more about theatrical compliments. Mainstream historical fact: falconry was a favored pastime of European nobility and often symbolized elite status. Certain birds, like gerfalcons, were so rare that only royalty could legally own them. Quirky tidbit: a medieval law in England once dictated that specific birds were reserved for specific ranks. Emperors got eagles, kings got gerfalcons, dukes got peregrines, and barons had to settle for goshawks. No word on what falcon was appropriate for jesters. Historians still argue whether falconry was truly about sport or more about the elaborate social performance that surrounded it. Judging by your current audience of bootlickers, the answer seems obvious. After several successful flights and one unfortunate miss that everyone politely pretends not to notice, you call for a break. A velvet-draped stool is produced from nowhere. Someone hands you a goblet of watered wine. Your falcon perches beside you, preening proudly, as if it too enjoys praise. You sip and gaze over your lands. There's a village smoke column in the distance. A few peasants pause in their labor to squint your way. One even waves. You give a small, kingly nod in return, which is probably too far away to see, but feels important nonetheless. This is what the bards sing about: the noble king surveying his realm, accompanied by fierce creatures and loyal subjects. You allow yourself a small fantasy, leaving it all behind, just flying off, hawk-like across the hills. No councils, no sheep taxes, no eel custard, just sky. Of course you can't. One of the nobles sidles up and launches into a gentle but persistent campaign to marry his daughter to your second son. You pretend not to hear him and ask the falconer what species this bird is. "Saker, sire," he replies, "fast and clever." You nod as if this has implications for your foreign policy. The boy herald shouts something about moving east to the next meadow. Everyone stirs and begins trudging. Your boots are already caked in mud. Your glove smells faintly of blood and victory. But for just a little longer, you're not in a throne room. You're out here, in open air, with a bird of prey and 1,000 unwritten obligations trailing behind you like your muddy hymn. You glance skyward. The falcon soars again, sharp against the blue. You smile. It's good to be the king, sometimes. You return to the castle in the early afternoon, your boots stained with meadow and at least one feather sticking out of your hood. A stable boy takes your glove with trembling hands, probably terrified he'll be accused of falcon theft. You reassure him with a wink. He nearly faints. Inside, the great hall is quieter now, but not empty. There's a line forming. Of course there is. Petitioners. You sigh inwardly. Outwardly, you put on your benevolent monarch expression, somewhere between listening and mild indigestion. At the foot of the dais, your throne awaits. It's carved from dark wood, set with dull garnets, and just uncomfortable enough to keep you from napping. You ascend the few steps and sit. One of your chamberlains bellows the ceremonial phrase, "The king holds court." And the parade begins. The first is a farmer. He bows low and speaks in a dialect thick as gravy. From what you gather, his neighbor's pig wandered into his field, trampled his beets, and may have insulted his wife. You nod solemnly. The court scribe jots it all down. You rule in favor of the beets. Next comes a monk. He's nervous, sweating, and possibly wearing sandals 2 sizes too big. He claims to have discovered a miracle, a statue of St. Cuthbert that weeps wine every Thursday. You raise an eyebrow. Only Thursdays? The monk nods enthusiastically. After Vespers, before supper. You thank him for the holy information and tell your bishop to look into it. Code for bury this nonsense under a pile of real problems. Then comes a nobleman. He's wearing an absurd hat and a facial expression that suggests someone dared to park their horse in his shadow. His complaint? A road near his estate is being used by commoners who have the nerve to whistle while walking. You suppress a groan. You rule that whistling is henceforth permitted, provided it's in tune. Then, your favorite, an old woman with a bundle under her arm. She shuffles forward, squints at you, and unrolls what appears to be a very angry pigeon. The bird flaps once and begins screeching. "He delivers messages," she says proudly, "divine ones." You lean forward, intrigued. What's he saying now? She pauses, listens. He says, "Your left boot is untied." You look down. It is. The hall laughs softly. You laugh with them. You give her a silver coin and tell her the bird is now a royal informant. She beams and shuffles off, mumbling about prophecy. Mainstream historical fact. Kings frequently held public court, where subjects could present grievances, disputes, or oddities directly to the crown. This reinforced the image of a just and accessible monarch, even if the decisions were often symbolic. Quirky tidbit. In 1381, during the Peasants' Revolt, a young Richard II personally met with rebel leaders and promised reform. Whether he meant it or just wanted them to leave is hotly debated. Historians still argue whether these royal audiences had real legal weight or served mostly as performance, allowing kings to appear engaged while actual decisions were made elsewhere. By now, your lower back is staging a rebellion. You shift on the throne. There are still 5 people left. One appears to be wearing a chicken as a hat. You steel yourself. A knight approaches with a dispute over land boundaries. His estate's map was drawn by a drunk prior and now includes a goat shed that may or may not be in official territory. You ask your steward to inspect the map. The steward holds it up. It's mostly smudges and what looks like a tiny fish with a sword. You declare the goat shed neutral ground. A merchant complains about foreign spices flooding the market. You ask if he's angry about trade imbalance or simply can't handle paprika. He hesitates. You move on. Another petitioner insists that his dreams are being haunted by an ancestor who wants compensation for an unpaid dowry. You offer him some rose water and a nap. Finally, a boy, no more than 10, steps forward with a carved wooden dragon in his hands. He offers it to you, no reason given, just a gift. Made it myself, Your Grace. You blink. You take the dragon. It's crude, but charming. The wings are uneven, and one eye is suspiciously shaped like a pear. You hold it up and smile. We shall name him Harold, you announce, defender of the royal bookshelf. Everyone applauds. You dismiss the court. Your steward bellows, "The king has spoken," as if you didn't spend half the time smiling at birds. As the last petitioner bows and leaves, you glance at Harold. You give his lopsided snout a pat. Then you lean back and stretch. Your spine makes a sound like someone stepping on a bundle of kindling. You've survived public court with your dignity intact and only minor pigeon-related prophecy. You hand Harold to a page with strict orders. Put him somewhere important. The page bows and scurries off like he's been entrusted with the Holy Grail. Time to wash up and maybe, just maybe, get 5 minutes to yourself. You're back in the castle's quieter wing now, ducking behind a thick tapestry that conceals a door known only to a select few. It creaks open onto a narrow stone passage, cool and shadowed, torch-lit just enough to discourage tripping over your own regality. You step inside, alone. Almost. Your chancellor is already waiting in the chamber at the end. He doesn't bow. He knows better. This isn't the place for show. This is where the real game happens. You nod at him and collapse, somewhat inelegantly, onto a cushioned bench. A silver pitcher of watered wine waits on a small table. You pour 2 goblets and slide one his way. He takes it without thanks. He's that kind of man. "Where do we begin?" you mutter. He answers by unrolling 3 scrolls. The first concerns grain. Of course it does. The harvest was passable, not great. A few regions reported blight. Some say sabotage. Others say angry fairies. Your chancellor believes it was rats. You pretend to agree. The second scroll contains a list of names. Men your chancellor either wants promoted or removed. You glance through them. A sheriff who's been too generous with bribes, a knight whose men are getting too loyal, and a cousin whose estate conveniently borders 3 trade routes. You circle 2 names. Arrange accidents, you say dryly. He nods. You both know that means anything from reassignment to a hunting mishap. The third scroll is blank. That's the worrying one. "You know why?" he says. You sigh. Spies again. Specifically, whispers of conspiracy. Your northern barons are meeting too often. One just bought 500 crossbow bolts. That could mean anything. It probably doesn't mean war, but it might. You ask, "And my cousin?" The one who always smiles too widely and drinks too little. "Writing letters. France-bound," your chancellor confirms. Of course he is. Mainstream historical fact. Behind public rulings and courtly pomp, kings managed vast private networks of advisors and informants. Many used secret rooms, private scribes, and ciphered messages to maintain control and to neutralize threats before they went public. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval monarchs employed professional listeners, servants who would appear to doze off in court chambers, but were actually tasked with memorizing every whispered insult or questionable toast. Some even wore hollow sleeves to hide letters. Historians still argue whether royal intelligence operations were as extensive as chroniclers claimed, or if much of it was bluster meant to discourage rebellion. Either way, paranoia worked surprisingly well. You rise from the bench and walk slowly to the map that hangs on the far wall, your kingdom etched in faded ink, borders as fluid as the river that winds through it. You trace a finger across the north. How long until snow makes the roads impassable? 3 weeks. 4, if we're lucky. You nod. Send food and letters, flattering ones. Your chancellor scribbles notes with a stylus that squeaks just enough to be annoying. You try not to notice. Then come the bribes. 2 noble families need to be kept content. One wants a monastery built on land that's already promised to a merchant guild. The other wants your youngest daughter betrothed to someone whose nose enters the room before he does. You rub your temples. What if we build the monastery and let the guild manage the grain tithes? Your chancellor raises an eyebrow. You mean compromise? You give him a look. I said, what if? The room grows quiet for a beat. Then he says, there's something else. Of course there is. He opens a box and pulls out a folded letter sealed with wax. You recognize the crest. It's your queen's family. More money? You ask. He shakes his head. Not this time. This one's a request. They want to send a painter, a foreign one, to do her portrait for a wedding gift. You pause. A wedding gift for who? He meets your eyes. They didn't say. You stare at the letter. Portraits mean politics. Portraits mean proposals. You take the letter and toss it into the fire. It flares up briefly, and the wax bubbles as if screaming. Not yet, you say. Not while I still have a hawk named Harold on the bookshelf. Your chancellor doesn't ask. He just nods. You glance again at the map. You wonder how long your peace will last. Weeks? Days? There's a knock. 3 short taps. You and the chancellor exchange glances. He moves to the door and opens it just enough to reveal a squire, flushed and wide-eyed. Beg pardon, your grace. A message from the queen. She says, it's time. Time? Oh, right. That meeting. You dismiss the squire and turn back to your chancellor. Tell the steward to keep the evening clear. No council, no letters, no barons. He nods. Even if they bring swans, you smirk. Especially if they bring swans. He bows and departs. You linger in the map room for a moment longer, alone. The fire crackles. The inked rivers stare back at you like veins. You wonder how many kings stood in this same spot, tracing these same lands, wondering how it would all end. You press your palm to the center of the kingdom. It's warm from the firelight. Then you straighten your robes, fix your collar, and step back through the hidden door. Back into the castle, where another meal and another mask awaits. The queen's sola is bathed in amber light, filtering in through tall arched windows, lined with colored glass. The room smells like lavender, beeswax, and stern conversation. You pause outside the heavy wooden door and take a slow breath. No guards, no steward, just you, a handle, and the promise of diplomatic subtext wrapped in embroidery hoops. You knock, once, softly. Enter, comes her voice, clear, level, mildly amused. You step inside. She's at her embroidery frame, of course. A tapestry in progress drapes across her lap. A scene of Saint Margaret slaying a dragon. You suspect the dragon looks suspiciously like one of your advisors. Her ladies-in-waiting sit in a respectful semicircle, each pretending to sew but clearly listening. They rise and curtsy as you enter. You wave a dismissive hand. All of you, out, the queen says, not looking up from her work. They curtsy again, faster this time, and vanish like mice behind a tapestry. You're now alone with your wife, which is not nearly as comforting as it sounds. You sit across from her and wait. Silence stretches like old parchment. She speaks first. You received my brother's letter. Of course you did, and you torched it. She knows this. You both do. I did, you say. The portrait request was subtle. She threads her needle slowly. Subtlety is not his strength, but ambition is. You nod. The silence returns. This is marriage, Not love-struck glances or moonlit dances, but cautious conversations between two people who share power, secrets, and the occasional fruit tart. And trust in small, carefully measured doses. I told him no, you say at last. Good, she replies. A beat. For now. She finally looks up. Her eyes are sharp enough to pierce armor. But you'll have to choose soon. Choose what? You ask, knowing the answer. Our children, she says. Their future. Who marries whom? Who inherits what? What happens to my name and yours after you're gone? You look toward the fire. The flames curl quietly, like they're trying not to intrude. Mainstream historical fact. Royal marriages were rarely about romance, and almost always about politics. Spouses were selected to forge alliances, strengthen claims, or simply prevent enemies from getting stronger. Quirky tidbit. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most influential queens of the Middle Ages, married both the King of France and later the King of England, shaping European politics for decades by sheer force of will and surviving both marriages with her titles intact. Historians still argue whether certain royal couples genuinely collaborated as political equals, or whether queens were always subordinate advisors behind closed doors. But correspondence and accounts suggest many queens wielded far more influence than formal records imply. Your queen sets down her embroidery and folds her hands in her lap. I don't want our daughter married to that toad from Brabant, she says bluntly, and I don't want our youngest sent to a monastery just because he likes astronomy more than hawking. You grin despite yourself. He's built a telescope from 2 soup ladles and a wine bottle. She smiles faintly. He saw a comet last night. Silence again, but this time it's lighter. She stands, walks toward the window, and gestures for you to join her. Together, you look down at the garden below, where servants are trimming hedges into poorly shaped lions, and someone spilled a basket of apples. Our rain has been relatively stable, she says. That's a dangerous thing to say out loud. She ignores that. But peace frays, and when it does, our children will be the thread. You nod. I'll handle it. She looks at you sideways. Don't just handle it. Think. Choose. And don't die before you tell them why. You glance down at her embroidery. St. Margaret plunging a spear into the dragon's belly. You ask, what are you really afraid of? She meets your eyes. I'm afraid of being remembered as your queen and not as their mother. That lands heavier than you expect. You take her hand, warm and calloused from the needle. You won't be forgotten. Promise me, she says. I do. You stay like that for a while. No speeches, no ceremony, just 2 monarchs watching a world they built from opposite ends of a crown. Eventually, she sighs. You're late for supper. You feign shock. A king? Late? You'll miss the roast peacock shaped like a ship. Tragedy. And I saved you a tart. Then I suppose I'll live another day. She squeezes your hand, then releases it. You leave the room without another word, letting the door close gently behind you. Out in the corridor, the shadows are longer now. The evening is stretching its limbs, and the castle shifts with it, fires lit, voices rising, bells chiming softly in distant towers. You pause for a moment and press your fingers to your temple. You've had a war council, a hawk hunt, and an accidental pigeon prophet. And now, you're about to endure the greatest performance of all, dinner with everyone. The banquet hall hums like a hive. Golden candlelight flickers across polished shields and platters as servants dart between courses like trained fish. You stand just outside the entrance, straightening your collar. Behind you, 2 guards await your cue. One shifts from foot to foot, clearly needing to sneeze, but unwilling to commit treason by doing so. Then the trumpets, 3 notes, high, sharp, and too loud for this hour. The doors swing open. All rise for His Majesty, King of... The herald begins. You wave your hand and mutter, "Yes, yes, I'm here. Save your lungs." The hall stands in a rustle of brocade, whispers, and the faint creak of someone's gouty knees. You stride in as regally as one can in shoes that feel one size too small. The long table before you is flanked by nobles, clerics, and one man who might just be a very confident pastry chef. You reach your throne-like dinner chair and remain standing until everyone else bows again. Then you sit. A steward bows low and claps once. Dinner begins. The first course, roast peacock. Not just roast peacock. This one has been cooked, then redressed in its own feathers, posed like it's sailing a pastry ship, complete with orange slice sails. It's equal parts meal and fever dream. You nod approvingly. A plate is set before you. Your food is carved by a man whose job title is literally Master of Slices. His family has done this for 4 generations. You think about replacing him with a knife and a bit of self-confidence, but tradition says no. As you take your first bite, conversation blooms around you like spring rot. To your right, a duke talks about regional cheese prices like it's a matter of national defense. To your left, a bishop is trying to quote Cicero, but it sounds more like someone gargling Latin. Across the table, your cousin Matilda is smiling too hard again, probably plotting a coup via custard. You chew slowly and nod occasionally, the universal royal signal for, "I'm listening. Please don't challenge me to a duel." Mainstream historical fact. Feasts were central to medieval court life, not just for nourishment, but for diplomacy, alliance building, and displays of wealth. Specific seating arrangements signaled favor or exile. Even what you didn't eat could be a political statement. Quirky tidbit. At one 14th century feast, the first course was a live lion paraded through the hall, followed by a juggler riding a pig. Neither were eaten, presumably. Historians still argue whether these dinners were truly extravagant nightly affairs, or reserved mainly for holidays and diplomatic events. Chroniclers may have exaggerated, though even a modest king's supper could involve dozens of dishes and twice as many forks. You reach for a goblet of wine. It's spiced and slightly too warm. Across the table, Sir Godwin is droning on about falcon talon hygiene. You stare past him, nodding slowly, fantasizing about smiting him with a breadstick. Your queen arrives midway through the second chorus. The hall stands again. She glides in, all composure and carefully chosen jewelry. You smile. She gives you the briefest wink. She sits. The conversation quiets for a moment, then shifts. Now it's talk of noble sons, royal tournaments, the latest fashion in doublets. Someone suggests banning purple tights. Someone else claims purple tights are a divine right. Your jester pipes up from under the table, yes again, and offers to settle the matter by modeling them. You approve. The nobles pretend to laugh. The queen actually laughs. Servants carry in the next course, baked trout with saffron sauce, candied chestnuts, spiced apples, and something that may once have been a swan. You're not sure? It looks angry. You eat, sip, listen. Occasionally you offer a nod or murmur a blessing. One baron toasts your unwavering hand upon the wheel of destiny. You raise your glass and hope no one notices you've forgotten his name again. Dessert arrives in a grand procession. Tarts, sugar sculptures, candied violets, marzipan castles. One steward presents a jelly shaped like your face. The resemblance is haunting. You poke it with a spoon. It wobbles like the economy. The jester appears at your elbow, whispering, "If the jelly survives a second poke, you may have to marry it." You snort into your wine. The final toast comes, as always, from the bishop. He stands, chalice raised, and blesses the meal, the realm, and for some reason, the peacock's noble spirit. You all drink, some of you harder than others. And then the real theater begins. After dinner mingling. You rise and descend from the high seat into the crowd. Nobles gather like moths. One wants permission to duel a cousin. Another seeks your blessing to name his new hunting hound Regicide. You politely recommend something less legally alarming. The air grows warm with wine and flattery. You smile, shake hands, accept scrolls you'll never read. A minstrel begins playing a lute in the corner, badly, but with confidence. Your steward pretends not to notice your pained expression, then quietly, the queen is beside you. "Bed soon?" she asks. You consider. Your feet ache. Your head hums. Your robe smells like roast poultry. "Yes," you reply. Together, you step away from the crowd and up the stairs. No fanfare, no trumpets, just the soft hush of silk and stone. As the doors to the hall close behind you, you hear the laughter of your court, the machine of monarchy churning along without you for a few hours. You let out a long breath. Another dinner survived, another dozen veiled threats deflected, another jelly decapitated. Your chambers are dark, save for the gentle glow of a single hearth fire, and 2 taper candles on the mantel. Shadows lean long against the stone walls, softening the chill of evening into something nearly tender. You peel off your outer cloak, letting it fall across a stool with the sound of weary velvet. The queen has already gone through the adjoining door to her own rooms, offering a parting glance that says, "Rest well, but don't think too much." Wise advice. You'll ignore it. A servant quietly enters behind you and begins the well-rehearsed process of unlayering royalty. One by one, buttons are loosed, sashes untied, boots removed with a gentle tug and a whispered apology when one sticks. Eventually, you're left in a nightshirt far less flattering than anything stitched for ceremony, but infinitely more comfortable. "Hot wine?" the servant asks. You nod. He pours from a kettle warming by the fire. Cinnamon, honey, and clove swirl in the steam. You sip. Your jaw relaxes for the first time since sunrise. Then, as always, the ledger. He brings it wordlessly. A thick leather-bound book weighted with wax-sealed pages and scribbled notes from every steward and officer in the realm. This is where the kingdom truly lives. Grain tallies, tax disputes, prisoner counts, rainfall records, and one suspiciously detailed report about an abbey's missing goat. You flip through pages your eyes catch. 2 more villages report mold in the barley stores. The bridge near Granton has partially collapsed again. A local lord fined for counterfeiting coin claims it was just a prank. You make a few notes in the margins, sign off on 3 routine executions. You sigh, nothing personal, just law, and circle a strange entry. 1 large star, red in color, seen above the western hills, repeated nightly, causes dogs to howl. You underline it. Astronomy again. Your youngest would be thrilled. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval monarchs were deeply involved in administrative duties, reading reports, issuing orders, reviewing accounts. Illiterate kings often relied on trusted scribes, but many rulers, like Charlemagne and Alfred the Great, learned to read later in life to better grasp the machinery of rule. Quirky tidbit. Henry VI of England was so fastidious, he reportedly tried to regulate the prices of shoes, pies, and even bedtime prayers for his servants, though his actual effectiveness remains debated. Historians still argue whether most kings truly engaged with daily governance or simply rubber-stamp decisions made by their councils. Surviving records suggest it depended entirely on the monarch, some micromanaged, others delegated to the point of disaster. You close the ledger with a thud. It's late. The fire's burned low, reduced to glowing logs that pop and sigh like old bones. You rise slowly, limbs stiff from ceremony and posture. A second servant steps forward with a damp cloth and gently wipes the court's dust from your face, forehead, cheeks, even behind the ears. You never understood why that part mattered, but they insist. Then the nightcap. not metaphorical, an actual cap, pale blue, ridiculous and warm. You slip into bed, your bed, the royal bed, large enough for 5 people, but currently occupied by just one half-tangled king. The sheets are crisp. The mattress dips just so beneath your weight. You let your head fall into the pillow with a long, slow exhale. And then the scratching, soft, rhythmic. You sigh. It's the mouse again. You turn to face the wall, where a faint hole near the wainscoting has become the secret domain of a particularly ambitious rodent. You've named him Gerald, Gerald the Bold. He is, by your count, the 3rd mouse monarch of this wing. You whisper, "Keep it down, Gerald. I've had a day." He ignores you, as all kings must be ignored eventually. Outside your window, the wind hums low through the courtyard. A distant owl hoots once, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wants to write. You close your eyes, and then 3 knocks. Not at the door, the secret door. Your eyes flick open. You sit up. The candle sputters, unsure of its loyalty. You cross the room, silent as only a tired monarch can be, and press against the hidden panel in the wall. It clicks open. A man stands there, hooded, plain clothes, smelling faintly of wet parchment. You know him. Your spy master. He holds up a small scroll sealed with red wax. No emblem. You break it. A single line inside. They move before winter. You nod, say nothing. He vanishes into the stone like smoke. The door closes behind him. You return to bed. This time you don't try to sleep. You lie there, eyes on the dark ceiling beams, one hand behind your head, and the other gently stroking the crooked embroidery on your pillowcase, a gift from your daughter when she was small. It depicts a horse with 3 legs and a crown. You feel the weight of the kingdom resting right between your shoulder blades. You breathe. Tomorrow, the chessboard resets. Tonight, you are just a man in a silly hat, whispering threats to a mouse and dreaming of comets. The morning bell doesn't so much ring as sneer its way through your skull. You blink awake to the grayish hue of pre-dawn light leaking through the stained glass windows, casting your bed in fragments of blue and gold that make you look far more saintly than you feel. Gerald the Bold is already up, judging by the scratchy sounds of his morning conquest beneath the floorboards. You sit up slowly, every joint offering its opinion about yesterday's falcon hunt and 6-course dinner. A valet enters on cue, carrying a basin of steaming water and a cloth that looks aggressively damp. "Your Majesty slept well?" he asks, in that peculiar tone reserved for rhetorical royal questions. You grunt something kingly. He begins the morning ablutions, face wiped, hair combed, teeth scraped with a minty twig. It helps slightly. A fresh undershirt is wrangled over your head while you still feel semi-unconscious. Somewhere in the process, you inhale soap and sneeze twice, nearly unseating the crown which has not yet been placed. Today's outfit arrives, a deep crimson tunic embroidered with silver thread and tiny lions doing unspeakable things to dragons. You ask, why are the lions winning? The valet replies, the royal message is triumph. You mutter, the royal message is overcompensation. But let him continue. A servant announces the bath is ready. You blink in surprise. Today includes a bath? Apparently, yes. The royal physician has sent a note recommending warm immersion to improve the king's humors. You suspect he just wants to test his new herbal soap recipe. Regardless, you're marched gracefully into the adjoining chamber where a large copper tub steams invitingly. You lower yourself in. It's scalding. You do not shriek. You simply breathe in through your nose and clench every inch of royal dignity you possess. Mainstream historical fact. Bathing in medieval Europe wasn't unheard of, contrary to myth. Nobility often had access to private or semi-private tubs and used perfumed oils, herbal rinses, and scented towels. Cleanliness was linked to health, spirituality, and social standing. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval physicians warned against too much bathing, believing it opened the pores to illness. Others thought it was best done while singing quietly and sipping warm wine. The wine part has aged well. Historians still argue whether the decline of public baths after the 14th century was more due to moral panic, sinful mingling, or the rise of disease fears like plague. Either way, being clean slowly went out of fashion, temporarily. You soak in the silence. Just steam, the sound of dripping water, and the faint creak of a wooden floorboard, possibly Gerald again attempting espionage. You close your eyes and for one shining moment, imagine you are not king. Just a man in a hot bath, forgetting the weight of treaties and tax revolts. But the knock comes, soft and inevitable, your steward's voice on the other side. My liege, the abbot has arrived. You sigh. The bath is over. The real business begins. You dry off, don your layers of regalia like a woolen fortress, and make your way to the smaller council chamber, informally known as the Room of Sighing. The abbot is waiting, robes pristine, beard respectfully humble. Your Grace, he bows, I bring troubling news. Of course he does. No one ever arrives with untroubling news. No one ever says, everything's perfect, carry on. He explains, a relic has gone missing, a very specific one. The shin bone of St. Basil, he says. It was taken from the priory last night. You squint. Who steals a shin bone? The faithful, he replies, or the French. The room grows quiet. You ask, is it miraculous? The shin bone? Yes. He hesitates, mildly. It once wept oil during a thunderstorm. You glance at your steward. He shrugs. You turn back to the abbot. I'll send someone to recover it, you say. In the meantime, pretend it hasn't gone missing. Say it's undergoing spiritual retreat. He beams. Inspired, sire. You dismiss him with a nod. Another religious crisis deferred with half a joke and a verbal fig leaf. Next, your steward rolls out the day's schedule. He clears his throat. One inheritance dispute, 2 bishoprics to fill, and your cousin is hosting a poetry contest you've been invited to judge. You groan. Is he still writing about fish? Now it's fish and destiny. Perfect. Also, there's a messenger from the southern coast. Pirates again. You make a mental note to either reinforce the Navy or bribe the pirates to attack someone else. You're not proud of the thought, but being king is often about choosing between terrible and slightly less terrible. There's a moment of calm before the steward adds, "Also, Your Majesty, your mother requests an audience." You freeze. Did she say why? She said she wants to check that you're still brushing your hair. You sigh deeply. The day marches on. You eat a light breakfast of eggs and soft cheese, served on bread that's either freshly baked or repurposed masonry. You hold court briefly to settle the inheritance dispute. 2 sisters, 1 manor, 0 patience, and send word to your cousin that you are too busy to judge his aquatic-themed sonnets. You suggest the bishop instead. By mid-morning, you've successfully avoided 3 noble scandals, approved the repair of a windmill that might explode, and signed off on a merchant's proposal to import something called sugar pears, which you suspect is a lie. And still, somehow, your mother waits. You walk toward her solar, shoulders heavy, because no matter how many banners you raise, battles you win, or dragons you slay, embroidered or otherwise, there is always a queen above the king, and she wants to know if you're eating enough figs. You enter your mother's solar like a knight approaching a dragon's cave, formally, carefully, and under no illusions of superiority. The room hasn't changed since your boyhood. Same ivory combs laid out in surgical formation, same tapestries depicting gloomy saints, same faint smell of rose oil and judgment. She sits in a high-backed chair near the hearth, wrapped in 6 layers of velvet, and the sheer force of her own opinions. Her hound, Sir Pricklebottom, age unknown, species uncertain, rests at her feet like an angry bundle of old yarn. She doesn't rise when you enter. She lifts an eyebrow, the royal version of a hug. "My son," she says coolly. "My mother," you reply, equally cool. "You didn't come last week." "I was mediating a land dispute involving sheep and someone's claim of divine prophecy. A common excuse." You lean forward and kiss her on each cheek. Sir Pricklebottom growls softly. You ignore him. She gestures to the chair opposite. You sit. A tray of tea and sugared figs sits between you. You sip. She watches. This is the opening ritual. First sip before the interrogation. "You're looking tired," she says. "You're looking very observant." "You've been avoiding me." "I've been avoiding everyone." She smiles faintly. "So, you're overwhelmed." I'm ruling a volatile, economically wobbly, spiritually divided kingdom with 3 rebellious barons, 2 rival bishops, and a son who built a trebuchet in the nursery. She sips. So you are overwhelmed. Mainstream historical fact. Dowager queens often retained significant influence at court, particularly when their sons ascended young or their husbands died suddenly. They wielded soft power through networks of marriage, clergy, and seasoned advisors, and could be formidable political players behind the scenes. Quirky tidbit. Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, signed her name as Margaret R., where R stood not for Regina but for Richmond, her own title. She had her own household, land, and often co-issued royal proclamations. Not bad for someone officially retired. Historians still argue whether queen mothers were truly advisors or quiet manipulators. Either way, their presence in court politics was rarely ornamental. Your mother narrows her eyes. I've heard troubling things. You groan inwardly. What now? Rumors that the northern barons are plotting. You blink. From whom? I have ears. Some are older than yours, but sharper. You wonder briefly if Sir Pricklebottom is a double agent. They are always plotting, you reply. It's how they digest their meals. She taps her teacup. Then strike first. Strike how? A marriage or an arrest. You shake your head. I'm trying to hold the peace. She leans forward. Peace is not passive. Peace is control. You look at her, at the lines around her eyes, at the steely calm that still unnerves the most seasoned ambassadors. Once, as a boy, you saw her end a succession crisis with a single banquet seating chart. You say, "You want me to send the Queen north." She doesn't confirm or deny. "She'll know why," you add. "Of course she will," she replies. "That's why it will work." You sip your tea, buying time. She changes tack. "And your youngest?" "He's 10. Old enough to learn Latin." "He already knows Latin." "Then teach him humility." "He built a working clock." "Teach him to dissemble." You rub your temples. "He's 10. She refills your tea. "And the girl?" You smile. "She's charming, plays harp like an angel." "She'll need teeth to go with the harp." "She's 8. Then sharpen them early." You take a fig, mostly for something to chew on that isn't this conversation. She softens barely. "I know what this is. You know." "What?" "This tiredness. You think you're losing yourself. One day you wake up and realize the kingdom owns your voice, your time, your spine. You're not a man anymore. You're a symbol." You nod, because of course she's right. She continues, "So remind yourself, privately, do something the kingdom doesn't expect." "Like what?" "Buy a horse no one's allowed to name. Write a bad poem. Steal your wife's slippers and claim divine right." You smile. "Did you do those things?" She leans back. "I did stranger things than that, and I ruled well." You finish your tea. She rises. "You do too. She steps forward and fixes the collar of your tunic, mothering you in the most queenly way possible, silently and with subtle disapproval. "Go," she says. "Your steward is pacing in the corridor." "How do you know that?" "I know everything," she replies. "That's what makes me terrifying." You kiss her hand. "Try not to die before supper," she adds. No promises. You exit her chambers with a new list in your head, possible betrothals, implied threats, and perhaps a harp with sharper strings. Outside, your steward does indeed pace. "My liege," he begins, eyes widening, "a delegation from Venice has arrived, without notice." "Of course they have. They're in the great hall." "What do they want?" "They won't say." You pause. "Then let's go find out." He nods and hurries ahead, robes flapping. "And you?" You adjust your crown slightly, just enough to feel like a person underneath it. Then you follow. The great hall has transformed from banquet theater to diplomatic battleground. The long tables have been swept aside, replaced by a semicircle of tall-backed chairs and an absurd amount of ornamental rug. Your herald whispers to you, "They've been here for half an hour and haven't stopped talking." You sigh. Venetians. They stand now as you enter, 4 of them, robed in crimson and black, with hats shaped like tiny galleons, and faces that could curdle cream. Their leader steps forward and bows just enough to be respectful without risking his dignity. "Your Majesty," he intones, "we bring greetings from the most serene Republic of Venice." You nod politely. "I'm sure serenity had nothing to do with it." He smiles like a knife. Introductions are made. One is a merchant. One is a lawyer. One claims to be a cartographer, but has ink on his teeth, which suggests he's also a spy. The 4th man hasn't spoken once. You're told he's just here to observe. Naturally, you settle into your throne and gesture to the wine. They refuse it, which is how you know something's truly wrong. "So," you say, "let's skip the serenities and get to it." Their spokesman clears his throat. "There is an item of interest, one your merchants may have acquired, perhaps unknowingly." Of course, you arch an eyebrow. "What sort of item?" "A compass," he says, "forged by a Genoese guild, but commissioned originally for a Venetian noble house." A pause. "Lost at sea?" you ask. "Possibly. Or stolen during a regrettable skirmish off the coast of Zara." You lean back. "Do you believe it is in my realm?" "We have reason to believe it was sold by a traveling peddler in one of your southern ports, and we have—" He smiles again. "A sketch." He hands you a parchment. It's a rather smug-looking compass drawn in painstaking detail with decorative initials and, for some reason, a tiny cherub vomiting wind. You examine it. It does look familiar. You saw it just last week on your son's desk. The little genius had been charting wind patterns using his magic spinny thing. mainstream historical fact. Trade disputes between European powers were common and often escalated into full-blown diplomatic crises. Valuable instruments, like early compasses, were prized both for navigation and as status symbols. Quirky tidbit: some early compasses were shaped like religious icons to disguise them as devotional objects in case of capture or shipwreck. Others included tiny poetry inscriptions to appease the winds. Historians still argue whether medieval courts truly understood the full scientific value of such instruments or treated them more as exotic novelties with supposed magical properties. You hand the sketch back. "I'll look into it," you say smoothly. The lead Venetian bows again, but this time lower. "We would be most grateful, and of course, should it be found, the Republic would be inclined to show generosity, particularly in naval matters." You hear the offer behind the words: ships, salt, spices, all useful, but your face gives nothing. "I will inquire personally," you say. They thank you twice. As they exit, you whisper to your steward, "Send someone to find my son," quietly, "and tell him to hide anything that points north." He scurries off. You rub your temples. The compass may not seem like much, but in the hands of the wrong nobles, it could be a pretext. And pretexts make excellent bonfires. An hour later, you're in the Royal Library. You don't come here often, not because you don't read, but because the library always smells faintly of dust and smugness. A scribe named Edric manages the shelves. He's the sort of man who corrects your Latin under his breath and shelves books in emotional order. You find him half buried in a tome titled "Wind, Wheat, and Witches, a Farmer's Almanac." "Your Majesty," he squeaks, snapping to attention so violently he knocks over a globe. "I need a list," you say, "of every Genoese instrument ever recorded in this kingdom." He pales. "That could take weeks." "You have 3 hours." He goes. You pace between shelves, passing volumes on herbology, battle tactics, falcon breeding, and one disturbingly detailed treatise on mole warfare. You try not to read that one too closely. Eventually, a page boy arrives. "Your son requests a moment, sire." You nod. "Bring him here." Minutes later, he arrives, barefoot, carrying the compass in a velvet pouch. He hands it to you and shrugs. "It spins really well." You smile. "It may also cause war." He looks thrilled. "I found it in a crate near the stables," he explains. "Traded it for a chessboard I made from old walnuts." You sigh. "You're too clever." "I know," he says proudly. You tousle his hair. "Now, go lose something less valuable." He departs. You stare at the compass. You could return it, play the diplomatic game, build trust with Venice. Or you could keep it, bury it in your collection, let the Venetians stew in mystery, and let the Genoese wonder why their secret tools keep vanishing. You smile, because now you have the compass, and the boy, and the chessboard, and sometimes, Being king means knowing which piece to sacrifice. Rain lashes the courtyard in long, whispering strands as you watch from your solar's narrow window. The world beyond the glass is a misty blur of wet stone and bent flags. You take a sip of watered wine and sigh. Another diplomatic fire nearly extinguished. A Genoese compass hidden in a pastry tin beneath your son's bed. And now the sky has decided to weep on the kingdom like an over-sentimental ballad. A knock at the door. Your steward peeks in, slightly damp and wholly unenthusiastic. "The nobles have assembled, sire." You raise an eyebrow. "Which nobles?" "The ones you've postponed for 4 weeks." "Of course. The Council of Grievances." You put down your cup and rise. The Hall of Grievances is not your favorite room. It smells of mildew, expectation, and too much fur trim. The nobles are already seated in a wide semicircle like particularly overdressed mushrooms. You recognize them all. Duke Lionel, always angry about mining rights. Baroness Isabel, who once brought a chicken to court to prove a land boundary. Sir Renfred, whose loyalty depends entirely on the availability of sweet pastries. And several others, all powdered, perfumed, and prepared to be insufferable. You enter. They rise. Bow, sit. You do not. Instead, you circle them slowly. "Let me guess." You begin. Someone has insulted someone's wine. Someone else's cousin won't marry the right person. And someone, you pause, staring pointedly at Sir Renfred, thinks they've discovered a new border based on the behavior of a goose. Sir Renfred clears his throat. It was actually a swarm of geese. Of course it was. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval monarchs regularly held formal complaint sessions where nobles could air grievances about land, inheritance, trade, and each other. These meetings served as both court and theater, and were crucial in maintaining noble loyalty. Quirky tidbit. One documented complaint involved a nobleman suing his neighbor for allowing a ghost to pass through his orchard and frighten the apples off the trees. It was dismissed, barely. Historians still argue whether these councils were genuine forums for justice or elaborate rituals to placate the upper class and reinforce the king's control. Likely both, depending on who held the floor and who held the sword. You listen to each complaint in turn. Duke Lionel is furious that his mine's neighbor has expanded 6 feet past the border. He claims to have a map drawn by a monk who only got drunk sometimes. Baroness Isabel wants permission to build a second tower on her estate because the sunrise hits the wrong window. Lord Fernand claims that his falcons are being sabotaged magically by a rival family. He presents feathers as evidence. You pretend to take notes. Halfway through, your steward leans in. "The Count of Westmere, sire. He insists you see him privately." You frown. Westmere rarely leaves his lands. When he does, it means he's either deeply offended or recently poisoned, possibly both. You excuse yourself from the noble circle with a promise to weigh all claims with gravity, befitting their absurdity. You meet Westmere in the antechamber. He's tall, thin, and so pale he could be moonlight in human form. He bows, then hands you a sealed parchment. "My spies," he says quietly, "have intercepted messages from the north. The border houses, 3 of them, have begun moving soldiers in secret." You freeze. "And who are they loyal to?" you ask. He hesitates. "Hard to say, but they are not yours." You read the message. Codes, coordinates, a curious mention of casks marked as vinegar. You look up. "You're sure this is real?" "As sure as I am that this room has at least 3 more ears than it should." You signal your steward to clear the corridor. Then you look Westmere in the eye. "Why bring this to me?" you ask. "Because if this kingdom falls," he says, "my vineyards fall with it." You nod. "Fair enough." You tuck the parchment into your sleeve. Another storm, this one drier but no less dangerous, is rolling in. When you return to the hall, the nobles are mid-argument over who owns the stream that runs behind the monastery, and whether it should be called the Blessed Brook or the Duke's Ditch. You hold up a hand. Silence. "Here's what we're going to do," you announce. You settle 5 disputes in 3 minutes, mostly with creative punishments and equally creative geography. You declare one stream sacred, another cursed, and suggest that the offending falcons attend confession. Everyone leaves grumbling but vaguely satisfied. You retreat to your solar. There you stare at the fire and think. You think about soldiers who aren't yours, about vinegar casks that might hold swords, about your children, your queen, your mother, and Gerald the Bold, who squeaks knowingly from somewhere in the wall. You whisper, "Not yet." Then you stand and begin drafting a letter to an old enemy who may now need to become a new friend. Your quill scratches across the parchment like a mouse dragging a sword. Each word matters, measured, weighted, slightly dipped in honey, but hard as iron beneath the sweetness. You address it not to a noble, not to a bishop, but to someone far more dangerous, the Queen of the Eastern March, your former betrothed, your almost wife, and, depending on the century's mood, your current rival. You pause, ink suspended. "My dearest enemy," you write, then frown. Too honest. You try again. "To the ever-wise, ever-watchful sovereign of the marches." Better. Flowery, slightly sarcastic, just the right tone to open the door without sounding desperate. You invite her to send a small delegation for cultural exchange, a well-known euphemism for "let's talk without swords." You hint at shared interests, mutual threats, and a few too many soldiers gathering in places too far from vineyards and too close to your borders. You seal the letter with dark green wax and your private signet, an owl, wings unfurled. It flies out that afternoon, via your fastest courier. You stare at the fire until long after the hooves are out of earshot. Mainstream historical fact: medieval alliances were often forged or rekindled through strategic correspondence. Letters between monarchs could be packed with subtext. Every salutation, every metaphor, every choice of seal, a calculated move. Quirky tidbit: some kings infused their ink with spices or perfumes to leave a lingering impression, or used invisible ink made from lemon juice, which only revealed its contents when warmed over flame. Historians still argue whether certain royal flirtations by letter were sincere or elaborate political theater. Surviving correspondence from figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Frederick II suggests that sometimes, at least, both could be true. Your steward knocks once and enters. Sire, the scribes report that the southern harvest will be light. You sigh. How light? Let's just say we may need to redefine feast. You nod slowly. Begin rationing plans, quietly. Offer a royal blessing for root vegetables. He bows and leaves. You lean back and close your eyes. A weak harvest means discontent. Discontent means opportunity for the ambitious and the bitter. And you already have enough nobles looking at your throne like it's a buffet chair. As dusk deepens, your queen appears. She doesn't knock. She never does. She sets a small plate beside you. Bread, cheese, apple slices with honey. You hadn't realized you were hungry until just now. You look like someone who tried diplomacy and remembered why it gives you hives, she says, sitting across from you. She'll respond, you murmur. She always does. Eventually. She still has the necklace, your queen says, watching the fire. I thought she burned that. She's sentimental, you smirk. How do you know? Because I still have mine. She reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a carved ivory comb. It's small, delicate, and ancient. One of the few things you gave her before the crown complicated everything. I use it when I want to remember the boy who was almost charming. You laugh. That boy didn't have 10 barons waiting to overthrow him. No, she says. He just had acne and a fondness for frogs. You break the bread, share the cheese. Quiet reigns for a moment. Then she says, you know she might come herself. You raise an eyebrow. She's not that bold. She once dueled a tax collector in front of her entire court. Fair, you concede. You finish the bread. What would you do if you were her? She leans back. Send a gift. Something alive. Something unsettling. Like what? A lynx, or a monk who won't stop quoting poetry. You chuckle. And what would you send back? A mirror. You both sit in the golden hush of a dying fire. Then a knock, sharp, urgent. Your steward again? Paler this time. Sire, riders from the eastern woods. 3 of them. No banners, but armed. You rise. You're led to the inner courtyard where torches flicker nervously in the wind. 3 riders dismount, cloaked, silent. The middle one steps forward and removes their hood. It's her, the Queen of the Eastern March. You haven't seen her in 10 years. Her hair is streaked with silver. Her expression is unreadable. Her boots are muddied. Her sword casually strapped to her back like a sleeping dog. She nods once. "Evening," she says. "Bit sudden," you reply. She shrugs. "You said we had mutual problems. I assumed you meant the ones that involve armies." You glance at your steward. "Prepare the map room." She steps past you, still not smiling. "I'm too old for riddles," she mutters. "Let's see who's really moving pieces." As she disappears into the hallway, your queen appears behind you. "Do not let her near the wine cellar," she whispers. You nod. Tonight, it seems, is not for rest. Tonight, old stories walk through doors and ask for maps. The map room smells like dust, candle wax, and long-held grudges. You and the Queen of the Eastern March stand side by side at the massive oak table, staring down at a hand-inked rendering of your combined borders, rivers curling like veins, mountains jagged like broken teeth, and too many little red flags sprouting like bad omens. "Nice parchment," she mutters. "Still using goat?" You nod. "Only the stubborn ones." She smirks. Progress. Your queen enters next, flanked by 2 silent guards and a tray of wine that may or may not be poisoned. She pours herself a cup and leans in. "So," she says casually, "which of your barons is stupid enough to poke both kingdoms in the ribs at once?" The Queen of the Eastern March taps a finger against a shaded region along the shared border. "Him," she says. "Lord Marrow." You don't even flinch. You've suspected as much. "He's moving troops under the pretense of border policing," she continues, "but my scouts say his supplies are too plentiful for that, too clean." "He's feeding them from my southern granaries," you say. She nods. "Probably bribed the steward." You sigh. "That steward was my cousin." "Then your family's very affordable." Mainstream historical fact. Cross-border noble families often played both sides during periods of regional tension. Lords like Marrow could swear fealty to one king while quietly profiting from disputes between multiple crowns. Quirky tidbit. A nobleman in 13th century France once legally declared himself loyal to whichever lord is winning this week, claiming divine revelation permitted flexible allegiance. He survived 3 wars and was eventually canonized unofficially by local farmers. Historians still argue whether border tensions were born from real cultural divides or just excuses for greedy families to expand their lands while kings look the other way. The truth likely lies somewhere between diplomacy and plunder. You trace a line from Marrow's castle to the recently reported skirmish site. "That's 2 days' march," you say. "1," she corrects. "If you're angry." You glance at your queen. "Thoughts?" She swirls her wine, unfazed. "Either you crush him together, or he keeps inching until one of you wakes up in a moat." Silence. Then the Queen of the Eastern March rolls up her sleeve and places a knife on the table. not an ornate ceremonial dagger, a working blade, stained from years of actual use. She taps it once. Truce? You stare at it, then place your signet ring beside it. Alliance, you say. Your queen sets her goblet down next to them. And no wine throwing at banquets, she adds. The three of you stand unexpectedly unified. Then, logistics. You plan an operation, joint scouts, shared supply lines, coded signals, a feint from your side, a soft push from hers, and a sudden diplomatic crisis that conveniently forces Lord Marrow to return home or flee. Either way, he'll find less shelter than he hoped for. An hour passes, then two. Eventually, the Queen of the Eastern March leans back, stretching her shoulders. "You still snore like a forge," she says without looking at you. You raise an eyebrow. "And you still quote poetry when you lie. Only the bad poets." Your queen interrupts, dry as parchment. "Lovely reunion. Shall we discuss sleeping arrangements before someone stabs someone for real?" You end up offering guest chambers in the eastern wing. She accepts, but not before checking the windows for assassins. Smart woman. After she's gone, you walk the halls to cool your thoughts. The castle is quiet now, just the hiss of torchlight and the distant clatter of a bucket being dropped somewhere in the kitchens. You step out into the cloister. The rain has stopped. The sky above is open and strange, clouds pulled apart like old fabric, stars blinking like confused messengers. You hear a step behind you. Your queen joins you, wrapping her cloak tighter. "She's still dangerous," she says. "I know." "She still loves winning." "So do I," she nods. "I'll sleep better when he's gone," she says, meaning Lord Marrow. "I'll sleep better when I remember how to sleep." She reaches over and laces her fingers through yours. No grand gestures, just that small private rope of warmth to anchor the night. "I like the owl ring," she says. "You never liked owls." "I like this owl." You smile, because no matter what borders shift, or alliances are forged in midnight rooms, or knives clink politely on maps, this moment is yours. Simple, solid, and, if you're lucky, repeatable. Tomorrow you'll send letters to your generals. Tomorrow you'll inform your council that you've allied with the most unpredictable monarch in the region. Tomorrow your enemies may blink. But tonight you hold your queen's hand in a dark courtyard, and the stars for once are silent. Dawn arrives in a quiet sigh of gray and gold. The castle stirs slowly, like a sleepy animal blinking its many stone eyes. You rise before the bell, long before your advisors start clattering around with scrolls and theories. You dress simply, a warm tunic, riding boots, a cloak light enough to disappear behind. Today you'll ride out. Not far, just enough to remind yourself that the kingdom exists beyond parchments and politics. That trees grow without permission, that roads remember things even when men forget. Your horse, Ashfall, is already saddled. He snorts once when he sees you, as if to say, "Again?" You stroke his neck and swing into the saddle. No guards, just one scout trailing at a respectful distance. You ride toward the eastern hills where the heather grows thick and the air smells less like cooked onions and more like actual air. After an hour, the castle is just a smudge in the mist. You breathe, deeper than you have in weeks. Mainstream historical fact: kings did sometimes travel alone or in small, informal entourages, especially during peaceful seasons or to show accessibility. These journeys helped rulers reconnect with their subjects and their own sense of place. Quirky tidbit: Charles V of France reportedly disguised himself as a merchant to eavesdrop on public opinion. Meanwhile, Emperor Frederick II occasionally rode out at dawn to speak to shepherds, claiming he preferred truth from wool gatherers to velvet liquors. Historians still argue whether such outings were genuinely personal or just clever PR maneuvers to maintain a ruler's image. But either way, people talked. A king on the road became legend before lunch. You reach a low ridge where you can see the valley unfold, a scatter of cottages, crooked fences, and sheep with a healthy disregard for boundaries. A few farmers glance up and do double takes. You nod, offer a raised hand. One brave boy waves back, then runs inside shouting, "The king's on a horse!" Word spreads faster than plague rumors. Within minutes, you're greeted by the village headman, 2 bakers, a goat that might be political, and 5 children trying very hard not to bow too deeply. You dismount and hand your reins to a stunned stable girl. She grips them like they might explode. You spend the next hour drinking lukewarm ale, accepting too many apples, and answering questions like, "Is the queen real? Do kings ever get hiccups? Did you kill a dragon once, or was it your uncle?" You answer each with careful vagueness and a light smile. Your steward would be tearing his hair out. A girl asks shyly, "Do you like being king?" You pause, then say, "Most days, but it's harder than it looks." She nods solemnly. "So is milking goats." Fair. You take a walk alone through the edge of the fields. Bees hum like tiny gossips in the heather. A falcon circles high above, as if suspicious you might have forgotten how to be a man. You haven't, not entirely. You find a rock under an old oak and sit for a moment. Just sit, not rule, not plan, not measure threats by banner count or infer meaning from imported pears. Just listen. The wind through grass, the chirp of unseen birds, the faint jangle of your horse's harness in the distance. Then, footsteps. Your scout approaches, kneels slightly. A rider approaches the castle, my liege, bearing the March Queen's seal. So, it begins. You mount and return. The messenger waits in your solar, soaked from a sudden rain and clutching a scroll tied with braided silver thread. You break the seal. The message is brief, and somehow more dangerous because of it. Marrow has begun withdrawing, slowly, not back to his lands, but east, toward the coast. He's not retreating, he's moving into something bigger. And he's not alone. I will move when you do. Also, your wine is worse than I remember. You smile. Even her threats are laced with petty insults. You call for your general. He arrives in full armor, because of course he does. Sir Alaric never enters a room he doesn't plan to defend. He bows and waits. We're riding east, you say. We won't engage yet, but we'll look. He nods, already scribbling commands in his head. And if Marrow is aligning with outside forces, then we don't look, you reply. We break. He grins. You begin gathering your small vanguard. No banners, no trumpets, just quiet strength. Your queen appears as you strap your sword. Back so soon from your poetic hilltop retreat? Long enough to be reminded that goats have opinions, you say. She kisses your cheek. Don't die. I'll try not to, you whisper. I hear the next council meeting will be riveting. As you ride out once more, armor hidden beneath your cloak, your banner rolled tight against the saddle, you look back only once. The castle stands firm, silent, watching, for now. But on the horizon, clouds gather again, not of weather, but of men, ambition, and that old medieval favorite, betrayal, dressed in fine wool. You summon your spy master. She arrives wearing boots, still wet from somewhere suspicious, and a smirk that suggests she already knows too much. She bows, lightly, then flips her hood down, scattering droplets across your solar floor like breadcrumbs for paranoia. You called, Your Majesty? She says, her voice low and crisp, like paper folding in half. You slide the apple across the table toward her. The monks say it's a warning. Beware the man with two shadows. She snorts. Very poetic, very vague, very monk. And yet, you say, I'd like to know who it's about before I'm stabbed in a chapel. She picks up the apple, sniffs it, turns it over. This is from the Vintiri coast, she says. Rare apple, doesn't rot. Supposed to grow only in cursed orchards and the gardens of liars. You nod. Sounds like my kind of horticulture. She pockets the apple. You continue. I want everyone watched. Nobles, pages, priests. I want to know who's moving strangely in sunlight. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval courts employed professional spies, often under euphemisms like messengers, scribes, or court historians. These agents gathered information through bribery, eavesdropping, coded letters, and the occasional monk bribed with beer. Quirky tidbit. One English king reportedly hired twins to impersonate each other and test the loyalty of his court. The plan fell apart when one twin developed an allergy to onions and blew their cover during a feast. Historians still argue whether medieval spy networks were effective intelligence operations or just Noble gossip sessions taken way too seriously. Most likely, both. Your spymaster bows. "I'll bring you a name," she says. Or three. She vanishes before you can ask what she means by three. Later that evening, you hold a small, unexpected feast. Not because of the goat, or the apple, or the tapestry, but because tension is a weed that grows best in silence, and you intend to drown it in wine, meat, and harp music. The nobles arrive in glittering waves. The hall sparkles with candlelight and conspiracy. You watch each guest enter. Duke Lionel with his limp and lion ring. Baroness Isabel with a new brooch shaped like a dagger. Lord Marrow, yes, he's here, with perfectly polished boots and a face that says, "I know what you don't." He bows deeply, too deeply. "My liege," he says, "what a surprise to be summoned, especially tonight." You smile. "I thought it wise to gather those I trust most." He does not flinch. He nods, accepts wine. Your queen appears beside you, radiant in dark green. On her other side, the queen of the Eastern March, in battle-black velvet, one hand on a hilt that may be ceremonial. The musicians begin. Harps and lutes, low winding melodies like smoke. Courses arrive, roasted boar, honey-glazed roots, candied plums, and bread rolls so fresh they practically blink. You sip your wine, then nod subtly to your steward. He brings forward a covered tray. You stand. "Tonight," you announce, "we celebrate unity." There's polite applause, though Lord Marrow's clapping sounds like someone patting a snake. You lift the lid, revealing the golden apple. Gasps ripple through the room. Your queen blinks. The queen of the Eastern March tilts her head like a falcon about to strike. "Earlier today," you continue, "this arrived as a gift, a sign, a warning, a curiosity." You hold it up. Candlelight dances across its perfect glowing surface. And it reminds me of something important, that even in our most festive moments, shadows stretch toward us. You stare directly at Lord Marrow. He raises his goblet slowly. "To shadows," he says. You do not drink. Instead, you crush the apple in one sudden motion, flesh yielding beneath your grip, juice running down your wrist like prophecy unbottled. A murmur rises. "Let this remind us," you say, "that symbols are not rulers, and fear does not wear the crown." You toss the ruined fruit into the fire. It hisses, smokes, and for a heartbeat too long, no one breathes. Then the music returns. Laughter, applause. Lord Marrow bows again, but you see it now. The tightness around his mouth, the glance toward the exit, the twitch in his fingers. He's waiting for something, or someone, and they're late. You lean toward your queen. "Prepare a search," you whisper. "Have his chambers swept, his horses watched." She nods once. The queen of the Eastern March steps forward, glass raised. "To the king who breaks fruit instead of heads," she says, "for now." Laughter follows, but beneath it all, You feel it, gathering behind the merriment, behind the masks. A second shadow, and it's closer than you thought. It starts with a scream, not a grand, echoing one, just a sharp intake of breath cut short, somewhere deep in the stone belly of the castle. You barely catch it over the harp strings and the clatter of goblets, but your steward hears it, your queen hears it, and when the queen of the Eastern March stops mid-toast and draws a knife from her sleeve with the grace of someone brushing away a fly, you know the second shadow just moved. You rise, no announcement, no royal posture. You're already striding from the hall, cloak flaring behind you, guards falling in with practiced dread. The sound leads you to the west stairwell, a place of storage and stone, and at this hour, nobody's favorite shortcut. A guard lies unconscious on the landing, blood at the temple, still breathing, eyes fluttering like he's dreaming of simpler shifts. Another guard races up behind you. They struck in the archive vault, sire. You freeze. The vault holds letters, old treaties, secret agreements, confessions tucked into silk, entire political lifespans folded between wax seals, and one specific thing, your father's journal. You descend into the archives. It's colder than usual, too quiet, the kind of quiet that suggests something was taken and something left behind. Shelves stand sliced open, scrolls scattered like feathers from a burst pillow. A single oil lamp flickers in the corner, and beside it, your spy master, kneeling, holding a body. Mainstream historical fact, royal archives were fiercely guarded in medieval times, not just for their political secrets, but for lineage claims and land rights. Forging or stealing a document could ignite civil war. Quirky tidbit. In one bizarre episode, a royal scribe in Bohemia attempted to fake a noble bloodline by inserting forged pages into a family Bible. He was exposed when a priest noticed the ink bled backward into a hymn about sheep. Historians still argue whether medieval political records were trustworthy or curated fiction. Many were both, truths rewritten by those with the most convincing calligraphy. You kneel beside your spy master. She looks up, grim. "It was one of mine," she says. "Kellen, trusted, too clever." "What did he take?" "He didn't get far." She points to a blood trail, thin and smeared, leading to a far corner. You follow it and find a satchel, torn open. Inside, 3 documents. One is a map of your castle. Another is a list of names, each marked with a symbol you don't recognize. The third, a letter, not to you, from you, or rather, from someone who copied your handwriting with terrifying precision. It reads, "By the time you read this, the Queen will have left. The alliance is over. Prepare your men. We move before dawn." You stare at it. The ink is still drying, a forgery, almost flawless, enough to spark war, enough to make your allies scatter. You return to the feast like a ghost walking uphill. Your queens meet you in the antechamber. "Someone forged my hand," you say, handing over the note. They plan to send it after tonight. The Queen of the Eastern March reads it, nostrils flaring.
If this reached my camp, I'd have ridden out before the bread cooled. Your queen holds the parchment to the light. This symbol here, I've seen it before. In my mother's ledgers, she used it to mark double debts, money owed to two masters. You stare at it, debt, loyalty, lies, and a shadow wearing your face. You turn to your steward, double the watch. No one leaves the castle, not even the goat. He nods, already barking orders. You send for the stable master. Search every saddlebag, every cart. I want to know who brought ink and wax. You send for the kitchen matron. Tell me who's been skipping meals, who doesn't gossip, who doesn't blink. You send for the jester. Yes, the jester. He arrives blinking, holding a lute and a half-eaten onion. Your Majesty? You see everyone, you say. I need a list. People behaving like they're waiting. He nods solemnly, like cats near a bird cage. Exactly. You want names? I want shadows. He grins. I have those by the dozen. You begin piecing together the truth. Not a single traitor, but several. Not a coup from without, but a fracture from within. Someone, maybe more than one, wants you doubted, disarmed, dethroned. Not with armies, but with ink, with whispers, with questions no one can answer fast enough. You retreat to the chapel, small, dark, empty at this hour. You sit beneath the cracked statue of Saint Odelia, patron of blindness and inconvenient miracles. You stare at the flickering candle, and then you say softly to no one in particular, "Come out." Silence. Then a voice behind you, calm, too calm. I wondered how long it would take. You turn. It's Lord Marrow. Of course it is. You forged the letter, you ask. No, I merely ensured it was available. You rise. Why? He steps forward. Because you've grown cautious, predictable. You build alliances instead of thrones. You break apples instead of necks. You wanted me to start a war? I wanted to see if you deserved to stop one. A beat. Then he adds, almost fondly, and I wanted your father's journal. You study him. He's not sweating, not smiling, just waiting. You step forward, and without breaking eye contact say, "You're under arrest." He bows slightly, but there's a twinkle in his eye, as if he's already 2 moves ahead. They take Lord Marrow quietly. No chains, no screaming, just a small army of guards, the whisper of drawn steel, and the click of a door locking behind a man who thinks this is part of a game he's still playing. He doesn't resist. That's what unnerves you. He's already surrendered to the next chapter, his smug silence taunting you more than any last word could. Back in your sola, the 3 of you regroup. You, your queen, and the Queen of the Eastern March, now pacing with a dagger between her fingers like it's part of her pulse. He wanted to be caught, she mutters. Your queen agrees.
He expected a stage and an audience. You sit at the hearth, elbows on knees, thoughts curling like smoke above the fire. If Marrow is just a pawn, you say, who's moving the rest? Mainstream historical fact. Political prisoners in royal courts were often left alive not out of mercy, but as bait for higher conspirators. Monarchs would use rumors of torture, secret confessions, or even faked executions to draw out shadow players. Quirky tidbit: in one curious case, a German duke staged his own poisoning to see who would try to replace him during his dying hours. He survived. 3 people didn't. Historians still argue whether some confessions extracted from imprisoned nobles were authentic or choreographed to fit the king's narrative. The line between truth and pageantry was razor thin and often sharpened by fear. Your steward returns, breathless. Sire, we found a hidden compartment in Marrow's chamber. Messages, receipts, names. You stand, and in minutes, you're there. The compartment is behind a bookshelf, a panel so seamless it fooled even your best scribes. Inside, a leather folio stuffed with coded letters. Some are written on paper with Venetian watermarks, others sealed in wax you don't recognize, burnt amber, strange spiral symbols. One letter is written on silk, another on cured hide. The contents? Incriminating. A list of barons with discreet debts, a mention of a mirror king waiting across the sea. One passage reads, "The owl sleeps by firelight, but the fox wakes near thunder." You whisper to your queen, "Fox?" She nods slowly. There's a noble house in the far north, sigils of fox with 3 tails. They haven't sworn to you in years. And the thunder? Probably means war, the queen of the Eastern March says, or really bad poetry. You're quiet for a moment. Then you say, "I want them arrested." Quietly. Start with the barons on this list. Your spy master appears like a ghost. "I already have half of them under watch," she says. "The rest are watching you." You smile grimly. "Then let's give them something to see." That night you hold a royal address, not to the nobles, not to the court, but to the people. In the outer courtyard, beneath torches and a starless sky, you stand on the high balcony and speak not as a king, but as a man who has been targeted. They have tried to unseat your ruler with forged words, you say, with shadow games, with coins exchanged in corners and lies wrapped in seals. The crowd listens, hundreds of faces glowing with torchlight, brows furrowed in the cold. But truth walks openly, you say, and it is not afraid. A cheer? Not a roar? Just enough. You turn to your steward as you step down. "Send a messenger to the Abbey of St. Farah. I want their monks here by morning." "More monks, sire?" "Yes, these ones read codes." The Queen of the Eastern March catches you by the arm. "You realize," she says, "if this spreads, If your people think your court is a nest of traitors, they won't, you say. She narrows her eyes. How can you be sure? You glance back at the crowd. Because I told them first. Back inside, your children are waiting in the royal nursery. You try not to show the weight on your shoulders, but your daughter sees it anyway. Did someone lie to you again? She asks, curling into her wool blanket. You kneel beside her. Yes, you admit, but I found out before it was too late. She nods. Good, because I drew this. She hands you a parchment with crayon-colored crowns, 3 of them, 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 gold. Which one is me? You ask. The blue one, she says. It's the one that watches all the others. You kiss her forehead, and for a brief, flickering moment, you're not a king under siege. You're just a father, a husband, a man who still has people worth fighting for, not just with. You rise, return to the fire, and begin drafting one last letter before dawn. This one, not to a queen or a noble, but to the fox. You don't threaten, you invite, not to war, but to a choice, to step into the light, or burn in the shadow they tried to wear as yours. Dawn arrives with a gray hush, the kind that smothers noise and plans in equal measure. Rain mist settles on the castle stones, softening the banners, muting the colors of a court on edge. You stand in the upper gallery, watching the courtyard below. The Queen of the Eastern March is preparing to depart. Her soldiers, cloaked in oilskin, ready the horses with a precision that says they don't expect to return quietly. She's already mounted by the time she looks up at you. No wave, just a nod, a flick of the reins. Gone, like the storm that passed through last night, but left puddles deep enough to drown the unready. You return to your chamber, passing guards whose hands linger near their hilts just a little too long. Loyalty is intact, but nerves are fraying like bad thread. Your steward meets you at the door, bearing 2 scrolls and a face that says this is going to ruin breakfast. The first scroll is from your northern spy ring, confirmation that the House of the Fox has been amassing arms, quietly, legally, ostensibly for defense. You read it twice. Then the second scroll, a letter, anonymous, inked in a hand that slants like a sword stroke. It reads, "There are 3 kings in your kingdom. One wears the crown, one wears the mask, and one waits." You hand it to your queen. She reads it without blinking, then burns it in the hearth. Poets, she mutters, should stick to rhyming. You both know it wasn't poetry. Mainstream historical fact. Monarchs regularly received anonymous threats or riddles meant to unsettle or provoke. These were sometimes the work of lone madmen, but often they were calculated tests from enemies measuring a king's reaction time. Quirky tidbit. One medieval duke responded to a threatening riddle by commissioning a tapestry of his own beard strangling a snake. It wasn't subtle, but the messages stopped. Historians still argue whether kings were truly masters of their fate, or merely excellent actors on a very dangerous stage. Later that morning, you summon your council, not all of them, just the ones not on any suspicious lists. You speak plainly. "There's a rot beneath our boots," you begin. "Some of you know, some of you suspect. A few of you may even be helping." They flinch, even the stone-faced ones. "I'm not looking for confessions, not yet, but I want you to understand something." You lay a black dagger on the table, the same one found with the forged scrolls. "I see you," you say, "even in shadow, even when you think you wear my face better than I do." Then you dismiss them. Let them stew. Let them wonder. That night, you walk alone. No guards, no ceremony, just you, a torch, and the stone corridor that leads beneath the castle to the oubliette, where Lord Marrow waits. The guards unlock the door. He sits on a wooden bench, looking strangely comfortable for a man surrounded by mold. "You've come to kill me?" he asks. You shake your head. "I've come to tell you, you're no longer necessary." He blinks. "What?" You lean in. Your rebellion was elegant, almost convincing, but it lacked one thing. Which is? You smile. Me. You leave him there, alive, awake, and very aware that his name is no longer the most dangerous one whispered in your halls. Because someone else is moving now, someone with deeper pockets, finer ink, someone who has not yet made a mistake. But they will. They always do. Later, as you sit at the edge of your daughter's bed, she asks, "Are the bad men gone?" You pause, then say, "Some." She nods. "Good. I had a dream. You were wearing 2 crowns. You kiss her cheek. "Next time," you whisper, "make sure they're lighter." She giggles, sleeps. And you return to your solar, sit beside your queen, pour a cup of wine, watch the flame flicker, and wait for the shadow still outside the door, for the fox who still hasn't answered, for the part of kingship no one ever writes songs about, the part where you endure. The castle sleeps, but you do not yet, not tonight. And now, as the fires burn low, and the last candle gutters in its iron sconce, we step away from the court, from the whispers, from the echoing footsteps in corridors too long for sleep. Outside, the rain begins again, soft this time, like silk rustling across an old robe. You listen to it tapping against the leaded glass, steady and slow, like a clock forgetting to count. The king, our king, is still awake somewhere in the keep. Maybe by the fire, maybe beneath the stars, maybe listening for the sound of a door that shouldn't open, or remembering the laughter of a daughter who believes he wears 2 crowns, one seen, one secret. He has not won, he has not lost. He waits, balanced between shadow and throne, learning, as all rulers must, that the heaviest burdens don't clang or clash or fall with fanfare. They whisper, they weigh, they linger, and still he breathes, still he watches, and in that watching, the kingdom remains. So if you're still here, still curled beneath the blanket, still feeling the weight of courtly silence pressing gently at the edge of sleep, know this, you are safe now. The fire is low, but not out. The crown has not slipped, and the night, though long, will pass. So let go, sink, dream. Tomorrow the king will rise, but tonight he watches for you.